shallow.
Yeah.
How deep?
6 foot. That's actually pretty deep, right?
Pretty deep.
So they do like holes. They like structure. They like to be in between rocks. They'll lay in flat sandy spots between rocks. They love laying in the bottom of the deep hole. Remember that surffish, all varieties of surffish, are very much like the fish in the trout stream. They like to hang on the edge of seams and have food brought to them and not expend very much energy doing it. So you can kind of think the same way when you're looking at the shoreline.
If you're fighting a big halibut like that with a leader that's kind of an iffy size, are you going to let him run a little bit or keep constant pressure? He's going to do head shakes. What's your kind of philosophy in terms of bringing him in?
Well, I mean, for one, you never want to give the fish any sleep. Keep the rod tip a little high. A lot of times when you land these halibut, most time I see guys, when they bring that fish up, that halibut realizes that it's in shallow water, can feel the sand, and it wants to go. And everybody points it to straight at the fish. It's naturally to grab the reel or break off. As far as hooking it, I mean, you don't know where it's hooked. So keep steady pressure, and luck's on your side. But when you bring a halibut up, especially a big one, use the waves to bring it up on the beach. Don't try and tail grab it in the surf, because if you feel their hand and you take off, you break it.
When Vaughn said keep your rod high, that's a really good thing to say, because that bends the rod in the weaker part of the stick. You're not putting quite as much pressure on it, and if the halibut does decide to turn and take off, that rod will still bend quite a bit before it breaks the line, giving you more time to react to the fish. So.
The other thing, as I mentioned earlier with halibut, what I do, as I'm surfing the halibut up on the beach using the waves, I strip a little extra line off my reel so it can just free spool right off, and that halibut does its backflip and decides to bolt out of it.
Most of my halibut are along a T-jetty, and on a minus low tide, you're able to get out at the end of the rocks and fish into a bowl, and that's where you hook these fish. And the problem with that is when you bite structure, that halibut's going to want to go to those rocks. So you really got to pressure the halibut out of the rocks, and you don't want to give an inch on these fish if they're there. And also when you land them, when you go to grab them, 9 times out of 10 for me, they will flip their tail and flip mud right into your face, and right into your eyes. So when you go to tail grab, just turn your head to the side so you don't get that mud. They'll do that to you. And don't put your hands by their mouth. They will take your fingers off. They're nasty. But they're great fighters. And my flies that I've caught them on are just red marabou tails, a red body out of this classic flat.
A V-rib?
Huh?
Like the V-rib?
V-rib, right. Just a V-rib body, and then just behind the eyes, you can put like red Arctic fox or red marabou. It's a very simple fly, extremely effective, and I don't know if that's the pelagic worm they're after. I don't know, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, can you guys talk a little bit about, like, right now we're going into grinding season?
Jim just asked me if I follow grinding for halibut, and there's been a couple times when I've gone out there during the grinding run in the middle of the night and cast like crazy for halibut to no avail. And I think I'm not saying that's just the way it is, but maybe they were already full. Maybe it's like casting into a massive hatch of some sort. But seasonally on those days, which are spring tide days, right, during from June on actually March through June.
We just had one last weekend.
Okay, so the days that the grinding do run, those are spring tide days. Those are good days to go fishing for halibut too. They do like water movement. The holes that they are going to frequent are going to be deeper during those times, and the currents are going to be stronger. The bait's going to be moving more, so that is a good time. So in that sense, yeah, grinding runs are significant.
up in Ventura when the grunion were running, I noticed that in the morning there was a situation in which the tide wasn't hardly moving at all, and the fish were just staged up, waiting for the next night or the next night they were going to spawn, but they weren't far offshore at all. And there were just millions. I mean, the water was absolutely dark with them. And so I ran home, got some conventional gear, and figured I was going to do real well, and I didn't get anything. And then I fished them another time when the current was moving, and I think one of the things that happens is that when they're waiting offshore to spawn again, if game fish come in, a lot of times they'll go into protected waters in the bays and the estuaries and things of that nature. When you get a good outgoing tide, like a spring tide like Gary's talking about, it pulls that bait back out, and that's when the fish really go on the feed. The bait's discombobulated, it's looking for a new place to hide, they gotta change positions, and the predatory fish take advantage of that.
You guys fish the Santa Ana River mouth. Inside the river itself, a great time to fish it is that first hour of the tide pushing in. And normally those halibut stage up in the front of the mouth, and when that bait fish first comes into the mouth, they're all over it. As far as patterns go, I've used squid patterns on a full sink line, but obviously tied out a deer hair, and what that does is you strip it, it pulls the fly down, and the fly floats up, and I've caught many a halibut. That first picture that we showed earlier on of me, that's a squid pattern sticking out of its mouth. So, you never know what you're going to find.
I think this is a little off the bait subject, tide movement. When you do hook a good fish like this, a lot of times you may have half your line in your bucket. And when I first started fishing, my tendency was to get the fish on my reel. And I think I lost more fish that way than stripping into your basket and fighting the fish that way. Right, I allowed slack and they popped off. You know, if you allow any slack on these fish, especially big fish, you let the line move out of your stripping finger. A lot of times, people wear stripping guards on your finger, and you'll strip and it strips smoothly through your hand, but when you pinch down on that line on your rod handle, if you're not careful, if that line slips out of your fingers, that's just enough to break that fish off, or give that fish a chance to get back into the rod. So I play a lot of my fish just stripping into the basket and keeping steady pressure on it.
I was going to add, back in the 50s and the 60s when the DFG actually used to do biological research as opposed to fighting lawsuits, there's a bunch of good information you can find in the California Fish Bulletin on a species-by-species basis. And one of the things that was noted in their halibut same surveys back in the 50s is that they would do stomach content analysis. And the conclusion they came to, specifically with halibut, was they're finding empty stomachs more often in the nighttime than in the daytime. So in contrast to some of the other species we've talked about, which, stripers as an example, and we'll talk about white sea bass in a little while as well, that are more nocturnal species. And this goes to your question about grunion runs, and it may be consistent with the experience on the panel here, that they will feed at night, but they're more of a daytime feeder because they're an ambush predator. So they might be in the neighborhood, during the day as a result of the overnight appearance of grunion in the surf line. But in terms of playing the odds, fishing right during the grunion run in the middle of the night is probably not the best time to fish for halibut.
Just to finish up on halibut, again on the grunion runs, my best experience with grunion runs wasn't during the grunion runs.